Join the sexual evolution and get ready for Sex is Medicine. Sex is Medicine is your #1 resource for holistic sex education. Explore the connection between sexuality and spirituality, pleasure and personal growth. Discover the art of using pleasure as medicine and reclaim your birthright to more joy, more pleasure, and more satisfaction in every area of your life with Devi Ward.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sex is Medicine. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward, and I am so excited to be here with you this evening. We broadcast live into your ears the first Thursday evening of every month at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so you can join us live for all the good, juicy energy that we get to transmit during our live broadcasts. And of course, if you're not able to catch us live, you can always catch us on iTunes, TuneIn, and gosh, there's so many other little places you can catch us. I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but you can go to my website, DeviWardTantra.com/Tantra podcast, and you will see all of the amazing links that you can connect with me there. I had a wonderful day today. I just want to share a little bit about the day that I had today because it was pretty epic. It was pretty phenomenal. I've been doing a 3-day Tantra for women, actually a Tantra pleasure principles workshop with my new friend and colleague, Alexa Martinez. And today was just really, really epic. It was a profound sharing. We had a profound emotional opening and a profound sharing. And I was able to just share with our audience and everyone who was online with us. There were 500 people who had signed up for this broadcast. How honored and how grateful that I am as a provider to be in this position to share with you these ancient lineage-based and modern tantric techniques that, after everything that I've been through in my life, all the healing, all the pain, all the trauma, all the transformation, that I'm in a position to be able to share these teachings with you. And I'm just so grateful and so honored to have your trust and your support. And I just want to let you all know that, how much I appreciate and value all the love and support that you've shown me through the years and that you continue to show me. So if you want to catch that broadcast, there's still time. You can go to the website, thevioletbutterfly.com Tantra Pleasure Principles. So that's thevioletbutterfly.com/Tantra Pleasure Principles. And you can sign up and you can get the replays for the next couple of days. So I invite you to go ahead and do that because there were some really epic sharing and some really wonderful tantric techniques that we shared during that 3-day event. So this evening, I am excited. Again, I love doing these shows because I get to talk to the most amazing people. And this evening, I am sharing with you one of my sexual healer crushes I've been following for a while, and I'm just tickled pink that I get to speak with him this evening. The wonderful and glorious Mr. Rahi Chun of Somatic Sexual Wholeness. Thank you for joining me this evening, Rahi.
Oh, Devi, it's such a pleasure to be with you, to speak to your audiences, and I think we share very much the same vision and purpose and service, and so it's a delight and an honor.
Yes, yeah. So I would love if you would share a bit about your story and your journey rather than me just sitting here and like reading off your bio, which is wonderful, by the way. It's so in-depth and so rich and there's just so much there. Could you share with us a little bit about your story and how you came to be who you are today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so the highlights, I mean, I have to start with my birth, and I'll explain why. I came out of my mom's womb with very crooked legs, and the surgeons wanted, or the doctors wanted to perform surgery on my infant knees, but my mom, being a nurse, intuitively knew that she would massage my legs instead, and she did every night for about 3 years until they grew out straight. So that was really the first seed of my fascination with healing. It's from having received the healing touch of my own mother. And so I grew up really fascinated with the healing potential of touch and intentional touch specifically. So I just loved massaging my parents growing up. And then cut to my late teens and early 20s, I was fascinated with meditation. I lived in Japan my junior year of college, was exposed to Zen meditation, and then eventually Vipassana meditation in Thailand. And just this combination of intentional touch with presence, mindfulness, I found had kind of miraculous healing potential in my girlfriend at the time, in my early 20s. And I didn't understand what was happening. And so I wanted to learn everything I could about sexual healing, intentional touch, presence, and the combination of it. And so that drew me to various Taoist and Tantric practices. I became a Tantra teacher through Margot Anand's school up north. Over the years, I became fascinated with inner pelvic work, spiritual psychology, and then specifically around the nervous system and how to resolve trauma from the nervous system, and have combined a number of these modalities, including sexological body work, in the offering that I now call somatic sexual wholeness.
So what does that mean to you, somatic sexual wholeness? That's a very rich phrase right there. What does that mean for you?
Sure. So soma means of the body. So, there's so many therapies and approaches to sexual healing, and not all of them, surprisingly, involve the body. I think most people out there go for traditional therapy, counseling therapy, which has tremendous value. But if there's been trauma that the body's experienced and it's lodged in the nervous system, it really benefits the healing process to engage the body and the nervous system in its release. So somatic refers to that, of the body. Sexual wholeness, I interpret sexual wholeness as being fully present and exploring, experiencing, and expressing your body's innate and inherent sexual energy in the way that it wants to be expressed. And that's going to be different for everyone.
So that's really powerful. Why do you think that's so challenging for so many of us to do?
Sure. I think there's so many levels that create obstacles to that. I mean, certainly, depending on what society you are raised in, there are cultural fears and shaming around sexuality. I think traditionally, societies, I think a lot of male-dominated societies have been and still are in fear of what they don't understand. And I think a lot of that has to do with female sexuality. So there's been a repression over, I'd say, throughout, all of our existence, really, on a societal level. On a smaller level, I think within families, there's a lot of sexual trauma that isn't addressed, and it's danced around, and it affects, how we interact with each other. Our degree of touch, comfortability with touch, and expressing our sexual energy, whether that is expressed through our creativity, through sensual touch, through non-sensual touch. It's all, for me, I see it all as sexual because it's sexuality that created us. And I feel like everything that comes through our beings to one degree or another is an expression of our sexual energy. And then personally, it takes a tremendous amount, I think, of courage to really address whatever sexual traumas that may still be living within our bodies. And it does live within the body. And so I think there are challenges at every level. And on the flip side, to witness a liberation from sexual trauma at every level is I think, the deepest honor. It's incredible. And it's within all of our capacities to do that for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So what we have here, some of the bullet points that we're going to cover today are why our sexual issues are really our soul issues. So that's kind of curious. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, sure. When you look at the wide range of sexual issues that clients come wanting to address, whether it's challenges to experiencing full body pleasure, inability to orgasm, wanting to resolve pain or numbness or discomfort in the pelvis. When you kind of peel back the layers, you'll see that underneath there are really more issues that have to do with fear of loss, for example, or unresolved trauma, whether it be from an event or developmental or relational trauma, fear of being too much, fear of not being good enough. And these are really more life issues that are simply manifesting through our sexuality. So that's why I call them soul issues, because I feel like we all come, we're rebirthed into this existence with a certain kind of curriculum of life lessons, and I feel like they really do manifest through our sexuality.
So why do you think it is that the sexual issues are so all pervasive on this planet? Like I was doing a broadcast earlier today, and my co-host was talking about how she had relationships with men from all over the world, like all, many, like 10 different countries. And every single person that she was with, connecting with her culture, there was like some kind of fear or disassociation or disconnect or dysfunction in regards to sexuality. So it's not just a cultural thing, it's like a planetary thing. Why do you have any thoughts around why we as an entire, like a human species, are so fragmented and fractured around our sexuality?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge question, and it's a great question. I do believe that it really speaks to our core existence as sexual beings. I feel, my spiritual understanding is that we continue to be rebirthed until we resolve our karma. And I feel like, once again, they really do manifest and show up in our sexuality, whatever those life soul lessons are. I think if you grow up, when I do my intake with clients, I'm looking at a number of things, but I'm really focused on the developmental years of my client. What are the emotional blueprints that got formed? I go as far back as the client's conception. I want to know the environment and the relational dynamics in the home when the client was conceived, when they're children, what was modeled for them, and what they learned from that. And I think if you have any unmet emotional needs from one or either parent, it's going to show up in our sexuality. So I think it's, honestly, I think it's part of the human journey. And I think the human journey requires these challenges to overcome and triumph over in order for us to evolve in our spirituality.
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that. And I absolutely agree. Something I've been really, really fascinated with, and you touched upon it, is attachment trauma or attachment deficits and how those show up in our life later. And it's so fascinating, like the way they play out in our relationships, with our bodies, with each other, in particular in our most intimate relationships. So how do these early attachment deficits directly affect our nervous system, in your opinion?
Sure. So that's where we start to distinguish between event trauma, developmental trauma, and relational trauma. So trauma has become kind of a buzzword now in the healing circles, but there's a difference between event trauma that happens from an accident or a violation or surgery, as opposed to developmental trauma, which happens where there may not have been a one event occurrence, but growing up where there's violence in the home, it's going to affect how a nervous system evolves and feels safe in the body. Then there's relational trauma where, hey, I grew up in a home where there was no violence, there was two parents, but there was no emotional attunement to what my needs were. So that's going to affect my nervous system in a different way, where there's going to be chronic guarding patterns that may form around protecting my heart, which can show up in the muscles and behind the heart starting to involuntarily contract. Or if there's violence in the home and there are things that I don't want to see, there could be muscles around the eyes that involuntarily contract. So all these different traumas affect our physiology, which is going to affect our intimate interactions in different ways. But specifically with the attachment deficits, if my emotional needs were not attuned to by a caregiver when I'm a child, then I'm not going to learn how to address my own emotional needs as I grow up. So the way that shows up in a sexual dynamic is if I'm not even attuned to my own emotional or sexual needs, how can I expect my partner to be attuned to them? So these are ways in which attachment deficits affect both our nervous system in its sense of safety in the body, as well as our sexual dynamics in relationships.
And so I just want to suss this out a little bit more. So how, in your opinion, how important is the sense of safety in the nervous system to somebody being able to fully experience sexual pleasure?
Sure. So we know now that a dysregulated or unattuned nervous system affects everything sexually, from how oxytocin flows in the body to how blood is oxygenated, which affects the tissue sensitivity, which will affect your genital pleasure, to how hypervigilant you are, whether you're in your mind and you're engaging in your mind's chatter while making love, or really in your body and inhabiting the sensual pleasure that is being explored and experienced with your lover. So that sense of safety, I think, is really amongst the most essential elements to exploring your full sexual potential. And when that was missing or compromised growing up, it's going to affect how your nervous system develops. And so, I'm really a big advocate of addressing the nervous system first when it comes to sexual healing.
Okay, perfect. So how do you do that in your work? How do you address the nervous system first?
Sure. So I'm certified in a couple of different modalities that address the nervous system. There's a modality called TRE, trauma release exercises, which was really developed for addressing and re-regulating shock trauma. And then I'm also practiced in something called neuroaffective touch, which specifically is designed to address developmental and relational trauma. So the woman who developed it, Dr. Aileen Lapierre, wrote one of my favorite books called Healing Developmental Trauma.
Yes, I'm reading that book. Thank you.
Isn't it wonderful? I love
Yes.
that. I love it.
Yeah.
So in neuroaffective touch, we're really listening for how the body wants to be supported. And we use a whole variety of blankets and pillows and hands to provide support to the body in areas that it is yearning or wanting it. And a lot of clients, when they come in, don't have that communication channel open between their body and their voice. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it is really developing that language. It's a fluency in touch and asking for support. So we'll try different things, and let's say, for example, placing warm pillows underneath the lower back or underneath the knees, their bodies, they'll experience a relaxation and a surrender, which then starts to connect these new neural pathways between their sense body and their brain, and their body will recognize, oh, I can actually ask for something, receive it, and my body feels good. So for clients especially, or for any of us whose touch or safety needs or requests were not answered or not honored, this starts to rewire that, where the body can say, oh, it is worth asking for what I want because I will get it and my body will feel better for it. So in answer to your question, Devi, those are the two formal modalities that I use, TRE and neuroaffective touch. But honestly, I think it's as simple as making sure that our clients and our friends and our loved ones are really seen and heard and emotionally met. I think that is the most re-regulating for the nervous system, and to continually bring people's attention back to their embodied sensations and feelings. Yeah.
And so, when you first started talking about the process that you use to help, prime the nervous system or re-regulate the nervous system in these cases, my first thought was, wow, this is more than, just like a single session, right? But yet at the same time, these results, this re-regulation seems to happen really quickly as well. So what has been your experience as far as the time that it takes? Is like, if someone comes to work with you, or they look, and I know obviously it depends on the depth of the trauma that they experience, but is it like, they're going to be doing it for the next 5 years, or is it something that you've observed when you're doing the somatic based work? Have you noticed that the re-regulation, happens more quickly?
I find that it's the latter. I find that the sequencing of the modalities has an effect because they build on each other.
Yeah.
So just to quickly go through that, I first do a thorough 60 to 90 minute intake via Skype or FaceTime, where it's almost like taking an inventory of all the influences and experiences that have shaped how we embody our sexuality today. So I go back to the client's conception. I want to know the environment, what was going on with the family, what was modeled for the infant. Because we now know that, I think it's 16 weeks. Once the fetus is 16 weeks, it is absorbing the emotions of the mother and the environment. So I want to know the patterns, certainly the dynamics with the maternal figure, the paternal figure, because these really create the emotional blueprints. And what I'm doing during the intake is I'm making it okay that they learned about their sexuality the way they did, because I hear all sorts of stories. And the one thing I wish to take away is that stigma of shame that people have, thinking that the way they learned about their sexuality was somehow weird or twisted or whacked out. Everyone during an intake at some point will say, you're going to think this is weird, or this is going to sound freaky, or I can't believe I'm saying this. And everyone has some story. And it's not to say it's okay to be, to have your boundaries violated by uncle or a neighbor or, however it is that you learn, but it's not your fault and there's no reason to feel shame about something that wasn't your fault. So I first do the intake, then the sequencing of it is first addressing the nervous system. Then after that, I do something called full body active consent. It is all about having the body empower itself by reclaiming its voice around its boundaries and consent about what it wants to experience in regards to touch. So this is before I do any inner pelvic work. I need to make sure that the client has a connection and a permission that they give themselves in asking for what they want and knowing it's going to be honored. So for some clients, it's a revelation. I mean, clients who've had their boundaries violated, while we're doing the full body work, I will have them interrupt my full body touch by saying stop at random times. And when they do that, like those who didn't think their voice mattered will have an epiphany that, wow, my voice does matter. I can ask for what I want and it'll be honored. So I do that before any inner pelvic work. And the analogy I use, Devi, is I feel like we're so fixated around sexuality in regards to sexuality with the fruits of our sexuality. My banana's bigger than your banana, or my orange can squirt further than your orange. And it's all great, but we don't focus on the branches of the tree that nourish the fruit, or the trunk of the tree that provides safety for those branches to grow in whatever ways they organically want to, or the roots of the tree, which is where the nervous system really nourishes all of it, and then of course the soil, which nourishes the nervous system, which, is our belief system and the healthy environment in which everything can grow. So that's the sequencing. And yes, so in answer to your question, some clients honestly will have one session with all the modalities. It's a 6-hour session and they feel satiated and they feel like they had the breakthrough that they wanted. And, over the course of these modalities and hours, like time kind of disappears. Clients will think they were on the table for 30 minutes and they were actually on it for 3 hours. I have other clients who come, weekly or bi-monthly for 3 or 4 months because, as you can imagine, the range of clients' issues, are really wide. I have clients who've gone through 6 surgeries and are healing from cervical cancer to, clients who are coming out of a marriage and feel like they're missing something. Mm-hmm. So it ranges from really, restoring tissues from radiation therapy to anatomy of the erogenous zone. So it's a very, very wide range.
Can we talk a little bit about restoring tissue? Because I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah. I had a client, now, as well as last year was kind of So here's a client. She had 6 surgeries from cervical cancer. She had radiation and chemo. And so the tissue intravaginally was dried, very full of pain, very painful. And so we had to go very, very slowly. So with her, we did a number of things. I mean, we did the TRE to start discharging the anxiety and tension as a result of the traumatic surgeries she went through. And then I would give her a full body massage with castor oil. So castor oil, has been known for over a century to increase blood circulation. It addresses inflammation. We wanted to stimulate blood flow so that we can stimulate and regenerate her intravaginal tissue. So we were focusing on the lymph areas of her body to increase lymph flow and blood flow. And then intravaginally, we were using castor oil. There's different approaches to regenerating tissue and sensation and releasing pain and numbness intravaginally. One approach that I find very effective and that we use with her is to find areas of pleasure, increase those areas of pleasure, and then titrate or pendulate to those areas of pain or numbness to discharge the pain using a discharging breath, or charge areas that are numb with energy by using a charging breath, and using that reservoir of pleasure that she did have to increase and release those contractions. And so over time, I think it was after her 8th session, she said, Rahi, I was at my computer and all of a sudden my pelvic bowl turned on. And she said her libido, out of a scale of 0 to 10, it had always been at a 2 or 3, and it just hit an 8 and it stayed at an 8. So this is the healing, these are the healing effects of sexual pleasure and arousal. It is a healing energy. It's life force energy. And the more we expand it and nurture and nourish it, the more aliveness our body cells are going to be.
Wow, that's just epic and beautiful and very affirming for me, because that is the technique that I learned as well, as far as I call it, translating pleasure from one zone to another and using that pleasure. I think of it like a pleasure ball, like you're collecting a ball of pleasure and then kind of translating it to another area to remind that area of the body that it's allowed. It too can feel like that.
Oh my God, yes. And it's, I think if people understood that, there are ways to use pleasure in a variety of ways for healing, as well as obviously for consciousness. I consider sexual energy a spiritual energy when it's used for that intention. I mean, it can be used for so many different intentions, including manifesting your dreams, but certainly so many in the realm of healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that, it's like such a wonderful, it's a resource that we've been given, that it's like, it's our birthright, and it's an invaluable resource that we can use and direct in a variety of different ways, and it's so completely untapped. I really think that we are ignorant of it on purpose.
Yeah. And I think our, religions have a lot to do with it. I think fear has a lot to do with it. But when I look at children, when they're ecstatic, their whole bodies are just like bursting with joy. And that's life force energy. And I agree. I think as children, we knew it. We loved exploring ourselves. We loved playing with ourselves. It was innocent. It was natural. And I think somewhere along the line, the adults were afraid of their own sexual arousal and energy. And, because they didn't understand it. And it was really stomped down, unfortunately. Exactly. So, Yeah. And it's up to us to regenerate and reawaken it in the world.
Yes, Oliver. All right. So on that note, we are going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into the different kinds of trauma, how they can impact our experience of sexual empowerment and sexual sovereignty. So stay connected with us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Devi Erickson, and I am the founder of the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education. If you've heard about Tantra and are curious about learning more, then listen close. As the ancient science of Tantra becomes more widely recognized, it becomes more and more important for you, the consumer, to understand what kind of Tantra you are getting and where it comes from. The Tantric methods that we offer at the Institute are rooted in Tibetan Tantric Buddhist teachings, designed to catalyze profound healing and transformation in the body, mind, emotions, and sexuality. These are some of the most ancient and authentic Tantric teachings available today. We are also the only school for Tantra in North America that has been accredited by the American College of Sexologists. This gives our Tantra training programs an extra level of integrity and credibility. If you are interested in learning authentic and effective tantric practices to increase intimacy and connection, enhance pleasure, and heal your sexuality, then I invite you to head on over to authentictantra.com and get one of our free ebooks on using Tantra as medicine to heal and awaken more pleasure, more joy, and more connection in every area of your life. Go to authentictantra.com right now to learn more. Hey everybody, we are back with Sex is Medicine, and I am here with the very wonderful and highly informative Rahi Chand from Somatic Sexual Wholeness. Thank you so much again for being here with us, Rahi. Did I lose you?
Yes, it is such a great pleasure. No, I'm here, and it's great to be here.
Yay. Okay, awesome. Yay. So, before we came, while we were on the break and right before we came back on, I was curious, to know if you've, had any experience working with genetic trauma.
Well, when it comes to, people ask me this about genetic trauma, and I feel like there are a couple of levels of it. I mean, certainly there is the learned trauma by what is exemplified to us by our parents and grandparents. So there's that element of the learned trauma. I don't know too much about DNA, but I am certified in a modality called family constellation therapy. And family constellations that every family has a certain
Yeah, so family constellation therapy. I've heard of that. So I was asking Rahi about genetic trauma because I've been having just the most incredible experience since moving here to Canada and releasing what I consider to be ancestral or genetic trauma. And so I had this experience So Rahi, are you back?
Devi?
Hello, you're back.
Oh, okay, great. So as far as genetic trauma, in family constellations therapy, it's understood that every family has a certain energy field, and unresolved issues in one generation will get taken on to be resolved in subsequent generations. So I do believe that things get carried on through, whether it's through DNA or through the energy field, things will show up that are unresolved in previous issues, including, and I think especially, unresolved sexual issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was asking because since I've moved up here to Canada, I've had a few really fascinating experiences with what I'm guessing and I'm assuming are genetic or ancestral trauma having to do with my slave ancestry. Interestingly enough, so I was just curious about if that's something that you've run into, because I've been very visceral experiences, very somatic, like really holding this pain in my physical body. And then when my partner and I go into these different areas of my body and kind of like energetically and unlock it with touch and awareness, these stories arise, and they're not my stories. They're stories from my ancestors. So I was just curious if you run into that in your work.
Yes. So in regards to that, yes, I have. When I am holding session and we're releasing, pain or numbness or different guarding patterns from the pelvis, underneath which are always emotional, unintegrated events. Sometimes clients will have, they will feel as though it is ancestral. So I fully believe that. And when we have the opportunity to resolve it, then I feel like it does get resolved through the entire ancestral line.
Yeah, it really feels that way. Mm-hmm. So, we've been talking a lot about the importance of sexual wholeness and, that being an important aspect of our humanity. And this is, I'm just curious to pick your brain here about this. What do you feel about like, the relationship between enlightenment and sexuality, and then also, I know that many spiritual traditions teach celibacy, and particularly, like, I'm trained in some Tibetan tantric Buddhist practices, and so there's a bit of a divide there between the monastics and the tantrikas in that particular tradition. And what are your thoughts on the ability to be fully realized as a human being completely absent your sexuality, not just absent it, but like, having an aversion to it?
Well, I think if you're existing in, in an embodied human form, to have an aversion to it is really having an aversion to a part of yourself. Now, I'm speaking about sexuality. So let me put it this way. I believe we are a product of sexuality, and as such, our sexuality should be celebrated. But when I say our sexuality should be celebrated, I say that in a very broad way. I fully respect, people from different spiritual lineages who do not engage in sexual intercourse, but I believe they are engaging in their sexuality in their own way through their celibacy. I feel like they are making love with their spirit. And so, sexual energy and spiritual energy, I believe, come from the same source. It is all creative energy. And how you decide to channel it for yourself, is your choice and part of your very, very, specific spiritual curriculum and journey. And I honor whatever people choose to do for themselves. I do think it is an energy of consciousness, and when it can be channeled for that purpose, I've seen, beings just really evolve very, very quickly on their spiritual path. So I fully understand why people would choose celibacy. I myself, I have dreamed and may still, in my golden years, go into a monastery because I loved my time living in a monastery, and it was heavenly. So, and I did not engage in one of the precepts that I lived by, and I was 21 at the time, was no sexual intercourse, even self-pleasure. And I can understand why, because that energy, that creative, that life force energy is being directed in a different way. But I would say that different way is sexual in a way of making love with your spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've certainly been at places in my life where I felt as if I was making love with spirit. So, okay, wonderful. So thank you for that feedback. So coming back to us regular, normal humans in the modern day life, and the things that we have to deal with as regular, silly humans, so much of our dysfunction as a culture, I believe, has roots in our dysfunction with our sexuality. And so as we were talking about earlier, so much of our dysfunction in relationship with our sexuality has to do with relational traumas that we developed through our early childhood years. So could you share a bit about how our earliest wirings around sexual pleasure and arousal create blueprints for us as adults?
Sure. To be honest with you, one of the things I love the most about the work that I do is the intake process. Because as we are exploring a client's conception and the earliest memories of their introduction to sexuality, sure enough, those earliest memories or those earliest introductions inevitably can be tied to the patterns during adolescence, during their young adulthood, and to the issue that they are coming to address or resolve. So, for example, a client came because she can only orgasm when she's being dominated. So sure enough, in the intake, it turned out that her nanny, who she loved like a mother, would dominate her and would do abusive things to her. So these things get paired between love and whatever behavior or emotion is tied to that love. And in her case, it was being submissive. Her nanny would do things like hold her under the swimming pool just for fun and things of that sort. So it was an experience of rewiring her pleasure with presence and safety. And as that rewiring was happening, she had to be present to the sensations and emotions of that abuse. And she could smell the chlorine coming out of her nostrils in our session. And, this is 40 years ago. Another client, she said she can only orgasm when she fantasizes about getting math problems correct at a chalkboard. And sure enough, when she was a child, the only attention she got from her father was when she did well in math. So these early wirings are fascinating, and I find them to be very, very common. And of course, in the intake, I'm always looking for what are the unmet emotional needs of the client with usually their opposite gendered parent, because that is what we're looking to fulfill in our adult relationships, and that can often play out in our sexual dynamics. So that early wiring is prevalent everywhere. There's a whole body of work coming out. I think Dr. Stella Resnick is kind of pioneering this work that is showing how our adult fetishes, likes, dislikes, patterns are all tied to our childhood and our introductions to our sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. So what you're saying though is that the work that you do helps people repattern that. So it sounds like, they're frustrated that the only time that they can orgasm, or this particular client, is when she's thinking about doing math problems. Like I imagine that might be, frustrating. So
yeah, sure. Unless you're married to a mathematician, it would be very frustrating.
So in your work that you do, you're able to repattern. So what does that repatterning look like? Like, what is the result? Does that mean that they can orgasm thinking about anything, or thinking about nothing at all? Or what is the end result of that?
Sure. Well, I want to first underscore that the key to the repatterning is the client's ability to be present with their sensations and their feelings. And so this is where I feel like mindfulness, where sexuality and spirituality are doing this incredibly harmonious dance, because that's really the key to resolving trauma from the body, is a person's ability to stay present with those sensations and emotions that may have been too overwhelming at the time of the trauma to really integrate or process. So coming back to your specific question, what does rewiring look like? So first, it's really addressing the nervous system, what's dysregulated. And then specifically when it comes to sexual arousal, if they're wiring, for example, I had a client where, she was abused by her mother. I mean, her mother would come home, and her mother was bipolar and would just beat her up. So not surprisingly, her boyfriends were abusive to her. And if she wanted to orgasm, she'd just ask her boyfriend to just start pulling her hair. So the key is, again, being present to the sensations and emotions that take a lot of courage to be present with, because for her, it had to involve being present with the grief and the sadness of being beaten up by her own mother. And once that emotion can dislodge and integrate and release from wherever it's being held in the body, and it's often held in the pelvis, Specifically, a lot of times it's held in and around the G-spot, for men in and around the prostate gland. So, as a tangent, the crystalline structure of these condensed tissues of the prostate and the G-spot, which in utero is the same tissue, is known to hold past trauma and repressed emotions. So it just happens to be where a lot of emotions are held. But as these sensations of pleasure are coming up, rather than and the client feeling a desire to have their hair pulled or for some sort of abuse to happen, to be present with those sensations and feelings, to witness and watch themselves yearn or long for those, and be present in a space of safety and honoring instead, and allow the pleasure of presence and safety to start becoming greater and more expansive than the former association. That can start replacing it in the body, and that will recondition those neural pathways and wiring.
Beautiful. I love how plastic we are. I love that we can be reprogrammed.
Yes. And, all the hormones and chemicals that are associated with sexual arousal and pleasure are allies of healing. And so the rewiring can happen, I don't want to say quickly, because then everyone's going to go out and think, I can just rewire it quickly, because it's different for every person based on their body's history. But I have seen rewiring happen very, very quickly.
Yeah, well, I'm a case in point. I mean, my rewiring was like, wow, it was intense, but it was, and it continues to happen really quickly. It's fascinating, but I remember those initial, healing sessions, those initial tantric healing sessions for the first few months. I mean, it was transformative. There aren't even words for it.
There aren't even words for it. It's almost like you knew life as to be this, and then it's like a whole new playing field.
Yeah.
It's like completely different. And that's the power of somatic healing. When the body experiences a new truth, it just rewires, and then its experience of reality completely shifts.
Well, and it's kind of like, because, we inherently as beings, know truth, and that gets clouded and, gets filtered and all this stuff of growing up and, traumas and all that. And so it's like when we're reintroduced to the possibility of that truth, the body's like, well, hell yeah, I'll take that. Yep.
I mean, I'm of the belief that when we're in our mother's womb, and we had, and all of our connective tissue and our nervous system and everything knew everything to be one, and, all of our needs were taken care of. It understands that embodied peace. And so it remembers that on some cellular level. So I agree with you, Devi. When the trauma is released and the paradigms are shift and the stories are rewritten in the body, it's simply reaffirming what it's always known deep, deep, deep down inside.
And something that for me really was important, I guess is the word that's coming to mind right now. But for me, it was like I had done healing before, but it wasn't until I began consciously integrating my sexual pleasure as part of my healing experience that those really deep, transformative, profound shifts occurred. Like if I had just tried to do dance therapy, it would have got me to a certain point, but it was going into that pelvic floor. It was going into that G-spot and the vagina and the anus and all these areas where these core wounds of humanity are rooted.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's not only addressing the core wounds of humanity, but, sexual healing engages all three parts of the brain. And I think the most important part is that reptilian brainstem that controls all the involuntary functions of the body, like our heart beating and our digestion and also our sexual arousal. And it's in charge of our survival. So when a trauma occurs, it's that brainstem or that reptilian brain that takes over. And so it needs to be involved in the release and in the reorganization of that release of trauma from the body. And I think that's why sexual healing is so potent, in addition to having the ability to rewire the nervous system, in addition to involving and expanding your sense of safety in your embodiment, in addition to having all these chemicals and hormones as allies that facilitate healing in the body. That's so different than a lot of other forms of therapy.
One would think that we were wired for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, we are almost out of time tonight. It has been such a delight. So how can people get a hold of you and start their journey with you?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. I mean, I refer people to my website which is somaticsexualwholeness.com. And I created it because I wanted it to be as much of a resource so people can learn. There are interviews, audio, video, interviews of clients talking about their experiences receiving sessions, so that whether you want to come to me or not, you can learn more about how healing can unfold, specifically sexual healing, in your own body. And I have a resources page with a bunch of resources. And then there's a contact page if people want to reach out to me specifically.
Beautiful. Yes, I saw that. I was checking out your website earlier today, and you had a bit of an upgrade, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rahi, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the very near future. And for all of you wonderful folks listening, wow, it has been just transformational connecting with Rahi this evening. I hope you learned as much as I did, connecting the dots and putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I encourage you, if you are, where are you located, Rahi, again?
I'm in Los Angeles.
So if you are in the LA area, highly recommend that you check him out, particularly if you are in need of some somatic sexual healing work. And for those of you who are wanting to stay connected with me between shows, because wow, 4 weeks can be a long time, I'm going to remind you to reach out to me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Devi Ward Tantra. You can catch me at my website, deviwardtantra.com, or I am always at authentictantra.com, the Institute of Authentic Tantra Education. For those of you who didn't catch it in the beginning, I just co-hosted a wonderful 3-day Tantra Pleasure Principles workshop with the very lovely Alexa Martinez. And there's still time for you to sign up and get the replays if you go to thevioletbutterfly.com/Tantra Pleasure Principles, and we are very excited to be launching a Tantra for Women and Their Lovers 8-week Tantra coaching program, and registration is open for that now. You can find out more about that when you sign up for the Tantra Pleasure Principles workshop. Again, thevioletbutterfly.com, Tantra Pleasure Principles. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for joining, and thank you for all the love notes that you send me on a regular basis, letting me know that you're listening. It's an honor and a privilege to share this information with you and have an opportunity to speak with such amazing, enriching people, and for all of us to learn and grow together as a human family. Much love, many blessings. Have a beautiful, beautiful month. I was going to say summer because we're getting into summer and month. Good night.
You've been listening to Sex is Medicine with Devi Ward, your #1 resource for holistic sex education. And send your questions for Devi to answer live on the air. Connect with Devi directly at deviwardtantra.com. That's DEVIWARD Tantra.com. And remember to follow Devi Ward Tantra on Facebook and Twitter.